Yes, of course, people want to.
Salam and welcome.
Law and they want to
I hope you enjoyed the fantastic panel on socially conscious finance. And you can keep the discussion going as well via our official hashtag, IF2016. My name is Nimra Shahid, and I'm the Vice President of Communications for the Society, and I'm also a second-year English Language and Linguistics student. I'm privileged here today to be moderating the panel on women in Islamic finance. As I was growing up, I would always dream about what the benchmark was for my potential to succeed. I was lucky enough to watch the most important women in my life single-handedly grow a startup from one interest-free loan. The single transaction proved to be an invaluable investment. 15 years on, a franchise with a fully fledged team of over 100 women formed. Many of these women joined with virtually no qualifications from severely disadvantaged backgrounds, yet have grown to sit in senior management roles with their expertise being immediately requested. I became ingrained with the idea that no goal was too ambitious, so I found it incredibly difficult to reconcile myself with the ever-topical idea of a glass ceiling. As it stands, there is currently not a single woman on the board of the UK's 6 big Islamic banks. So what are the supposed limitations on women succeeding, and why are they in place? Here with me to discuss why women in Islamic finance is such a contentious issue is Professor Siraj Sait of the University of East London. His expertise lies in human rights, gender, and he's also a consultant to UNICEF. I'm also joined by Hanan Al-Najar. She is the head of wealth management of Gatehouse Bank with over 20 years' experience, both in the UK and the Middle East. And lastly, I'm also joined by Naomi Heaton, the CEO of the London Central Portfolio. She's gone from strength to strength in her career, being on the board of directors for Saatchi & Saatchi and also developing the first Sharia-compliant residential property firm in the UK alongside her team. Thank you for joining us today, and I'd like to hand it over to Saraj.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Nimra and IFES, not only for inviting me and for the kind words, but also for setting up this panel. And during lunchtime discussions, several of the participants were saying how IFES is a model both for inclusion, governance, and also innovation. So good to take it forward. And I think we are right to frame this discussion on the basis of inclusion within the industry itself. Now, we know the equality of opportunity, promotions, leadership is a big issue, and I have very distinguished colleagues who are going to speak about this. And I think we have made some headway in making this argument both in terms of diversity, how it's intrinsically important for women to be involved, but also in terms of a business case, how women's involvement will really improve our products, improve our market, and make firms much more competitive. But when we speak of diversity, I'm a little worried that we should think about diversity in all its forms. Not only the visual diversity in terms of representation of gender, but also in terms of class, ethnicity, age, and so on and so forth. And I like to really think about those who are inside this room and outside. So I come back from a conference which some of us were at, which was the first conference on Islamic finance in Africa, where the issues of gender diversity are much more diverse, because when we speak of stakeholders, rightly so, we're talking about leadership within the industry, but we need to speak much more in terms of Islamic finance system, which involves not only the bankers or the regulators or the Sharia scholars, not only the investors or the entrepreneurs, but women who are the consumers and those who are ultimately the beneficiaries of all of this. And therefore, the whole idea of product development requires a much more gender-responsive approach. So really, we are looking to simultaneously do two things. One is change the industry itself in terms of diversity and governance, but also, as we've talked about in the past, how do we change what the industry is all about? Not so long ago, as a student at the University of London, my thesis was actually on feminist ijtihad. It was about how women interpreting the Quran are able not only to make a change in the process and methodology, fitting in within the usul al-fiqh, but also in terms of the outcomes and how different it would turn to be. So it's not merely about the tick box approach of saying how many women are there. I think that's important. But also how these women, and men sometimes, are champions of that radical rethinking in terms of the gender balance and approach and so on and so forth. So think about it in the conventional sense of how our target groups are actually changing. Some of you were there at my LSE lecture recently when I was talking about Islamic development finance. So this is not merely about our private banking and investment banking, but in terms of reaching out, not just infrastructure banking, but in terms of, as the earlier panel talked about, the social good and so on and so forth. And that is where we are going to be required to move into areas such as the humanitarian context, the work that we're doing, for example, in post-conflict countries, whether it be Iraq, Somalia. What kind of access and financial inclusion is Islamic finance making a difference? And gender is going to be terribly important over there. At this point of time, let's face it as it is, that even though we say that Islamic finance is gender neutral, that doesn't mean it doesn't have inherent gender biases involved. The sort of take it or leave it approach is based on a lot of assumptions made about women, which haven't really talked or consulted women at all stages and at all levels. And that actually leads to the comment that was made at the Africa Summit, where women are already terribly important, that the future of Islamic finance really lies in the hands of women, both in terms of expanding the market, but also equally about the qualitative change that is going to take place. But in many ways, I think we are still stuck in terms of highlighting the importance of gender inclusion without really looking at the outcomes that we are aiming at. I think the approach that we have to adopt is twofold. One, of course, is the Makhasid approach in recognizing how all this is going to be important in promoting the very basis and the core elements of Islamic Sharia and Islamic finance itself, but also map it on to the Sustainable Development Goals, because that helps us to actually borrow a universal methodology, which is about goals, indicators, targets, and outcomes. And we've started the discussion. So it's both specific tools to Islamic finance, which are gender responsive, but also more importantly, using the generic and the universal approaches that are already taking place. So we need to adopt the approach of being a little more specific about where we want to go. And that would be in terms of the gender responsive tools that we have, the financial tools, but also governance tools. Who, what, when, and how, and where. And therefore, I think the way forward, as we are listening to all of you out here, happens to be that the specific targets, looking at indicators, and moving forward is what is going to be important. But I also make a plea for a gender-based approach. So rather than thinking of women leaders, which is terribly important, because I think it's all about women's lived experience, their voices, their priorities, and the needs, but equally about the dynamic, the gender dynamic, where the champions of gender inclusion are not going to be merely women alone, but men who recognize this as part of the Islamic ethos, but more importantly, the business case that is being made. I think in the spirit of leaving a little bit of time for question and answers, I'm going to recuse myself at this point of time, but hope to come back to respond to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Siraj, for your insightful contribution. I'd like to now invite Hanan to come up to speak on the panel.
Thank you very much, Nimra. And thank you to everybody who has organized this event. I'm really honored to be here today, and I'm really pleased to see the turnout, and I'm actually pleased to see the percentages. Seems to be a good mix of men and women. I really did think there was going to be about 6 women in the audience, and that was it. But I am disappointed that it's a little less than the panel before this one, but I'm not going to take that personally at all. Contentious issue. Personally, I don't think it's a contentious issue at all. I think it's an issue, otherwise we wouldn't be here talking about it. But I don't see what's so contentious about women in Islamic finance. I really don't. We're 50% of the population. Why wouldn't we be in Islamic finance? So I don't think it's contentious. It is an issue, and I don't mean to call out, I'm a guest here. I was asked to be here, so I don't mean this as a criticism, but if you go through how many women are speaking today, a apart from the 2 women that are on the women's panel. How many women are speaking today? One of the speakers, I think it might have been, was it Shahid in the previous panel, mentioned purchasing power. When you put together a conference like this, you have purchasing power. If you want women to play a bigger role in Islamic finance, use that purchasing power when you're putting together the conference and ask more women to speak, not just on the women's panel. That's a huge one. And I know that we keep saying that you as students have power and have responsibility. And I hate to put more responsibility on you, but there you go. You have that responsibility and you do have that power. And again, I am very grateful for you asking me here today, and I hope this won't put you off asking me back. You're not alone in this. I don't want to use the word discrimination. Oversight, shall we use the word oversight? It's a bit more friendly. IFN, Islamic Financial News, they claim to be the biggest source of Islamic financial news worldwide. They have a seminar which is taking place on the 8th of March. Does anybody know what the 8th of March is, the significance of that date?
Women's Day.
International Women's Day? Yeah, they have a seminar taking place in Oman. No women on Islamic, there's a seminar on Islamic finance taking place on International Women's Day, not a single female speaker. So, LSE, you are in good company. They have another forum taking place, Asia's largest gathering of Islamic finance market makers. There are 29 speakers. They've done better, actually. There are 2 women out of 29. So there is an issue. There is an issue. And I think it's really important to try to find out why. Why is this happening? I'm not an expert. I don't have the answers. I do have some real life experience in finance. I work for a fully Sharia compliant investment bank. I've not always been in Sharia compliant finance. My beginnings are actually in conventional banking. And I find myself now in Sharia. So I'm certainly not an expert, but I'm hoping that maybe some of my personal experiences can be of value to some of the women who are here in the audience. But I'd also like to point out that men also play a role in this and have a responsibility. Professor Siraj, I agree with you completely that women need to really drive the change, and women have a responsibility to take control over their careers and their destinies and to really push this. Again, going back to purchasing power, and I do think that women have that purchasing power, but I think that men do as well. And just going to throw this out there as one final remark. A lot of people that are concerned with Sharia compliant or Islamic banking, I prefer the term Sharia compliant, but a lot of people who are concerned with that tend to be Muslims. A lot of people who are interested in that tend to be Muslims. Muslim families, I'm generalizing, and I do apologize if I'm putting somebody in this bucket, but I come from a Muslim family myself. I personally don't think that my family is particularly traditional, but when you compare it to a non-Muslim family, we are quite traditional. And I think a lot of Muslim families, certainly when you look in Western countries, a lot of Muslim families still maintain their traditions. And part of that tradition is the traditional roles of men and women. And this is where I think men can help women in their careers, not just in Islamic finance. Question that I'll ask you: a married couple with young children, child is sick, who's the one who stays home from work, the man or the woman? Is it the man that goes to work and the woman who stays home with the sick child, or is it the other way around? I know that this isn't a blanket statement, but the vast majority of my friends, and not all Muslim actually, a lot of my non-Muslim friends, it's usually the woman that stays home with the sick child. Or even the choice to have children. Who gives up the job? we're lucky that we live in Great Britain, and so we have a choice. There's paternity leave now. There are things happening where men who want, I'm not saying men don't want to get involved, but where men who want to get involved have that opportunity. But I do think that men need to also think about their role in this as well. And I'm going to end it on that very controversial comment. Thank you very much.
And those were fantastic words, thank you, and quite controversial. But a lot of you are men here as well. And the subject was women in Islamic finance, but I think it's probably women in conventional finance as well. And actually all of you are looking for jobs, and men have issues as well. It's not just a female issue. So I don't feel quite so passionate about the contentiousness about the female issue. And I think it's more about creating your careers. And also we've had a lot of conversations about responsibility, because I think it lies with all of us to make a career. What I'm going to do briefly is to go through my career, which started in a conventional area and still is also in a conventional area. I think like many people, particularly of my generation, getting into Sharia finance has been a fairly random or convoluted path, and that's because the industry is very young. All of you have much more opportunity to get in at the beginning because the industry is now 40 years old, and you can make maybe that decision to go in straight away. Having said that, as other speakers have said, having other experience and other knowledge may be able to enable you to be more effective movers and shakers in the Islamic industry. Just having studied a course in Islamic finance and then going into the industry may not be the best route in. So I was at Oxford, and I was very interested in the UK economy and how you increase productivity. And from that, actually got into advertising, and I went to an agency called Leo Burnett. I went on the graduate recruitment scheme there. And I learned a couple of very important things there. First of all, I worked for a woman. That was probably really lucky. And she became one of the most powerful women globally in advertising. And pretty much I probably learned everything I know from her, and I still practice the things that I learned. But she was a mentor, and it's really, really important to have mentors, because actually you're all able, you're all really skilled. It's going to be kind of luck who actually gets there and who doesn't get there. And if you have someone who can show you the way, that will help you. And I passionately believe in mentoring, and I passionately believe in bringing people on and seeing how I can improve their skills. So having a mentor is really important. The other thing is you have to work really, really hard. And quite often I see people in my organization, we work long hours actually, the kind of fixed hours, 8:30 to 6:30. That's longer than a lot of companies. But they may leave on the dot at 6:30. And maybe there's more of a view about life-work balance. But actually, if you're going to make it, you're going to have to put in every hour that you've got it. And you're going to have to think out of the box, and you're going to have to take initiatives. The way you will grow up in your organization, the way that you will break the glass ceiling, whether you're a man or a woman, and women may complain about glass ceilings. Men don't have that excuse, do they? They just don't make it. So to break that glass ceiling, you've got to do more, think harder, think more laterally, and take more initiatives. So that's what I learned. And from Leo Burnett, I went to Saraj, where I was the youngest female director. And then I moved on to Young and Rubicam. And I was advising blue chip clients like Kellogg's and Heinz and Cadbury really about how they should manage and market their businesses. But I was always an entrepreneur at heart. And I think that's really important. And it's probably more important now than ever, being entrepreneurial, having an entrepreneurial spirit. So whilst I was doing all the other things that I was doing, I got this interest in buying property and doing it up and selling it. In other words, I was developing property as an interest, as a hobby. And after a while, I thought, well, hang on, I'm advising all these people about what they should do. I'll do my own thing. And I went into property. But the important thing was to be innovative, to have new ideas. And I did two things really differently. First of all, I recognized that if you were an investor, and particularly if you were in a busy job or you were overseas, that you needed help to acquire your property, to do it up, and then to rent it. In other words, you had to identify it and then manage the asset. So I set up a company which offered a one-stop service for investors. And also the other major point of innovation is I set up a company, and I think this is actually rather Sharia compliant, which made sure that the investors' interests were looked after, because actually in our society in the UK, we have mainly estate agents, and they act for the vendor, they act for the seller, and that's their job. I set up a company where my job was to make sure that the investor made the right decisions all the way along the line. They were thought out, proper, financially modeled, and they understood what return they would get on the investment that they'd made. So two things, a one-stop service acting for the buyer. And we still have the only company, X number of years on, that actually does that in prime central London, which is the area I operate in the private rented sector. So you need to innovate and you need to do something different, and then you'll start getting on. Having got that far, myself and my team thought, well, how can we increase our exposure to the market? And we thought, well, why don't we start a property fund? Property fund means multiple investors, and it means multiple assets. So you get more clients and you buy more, but also what it did was it enabled more people to access a market that lots of people can see is a really good investment. Investing in residential property in central London is a good investment. It doubles in value every 8 years. It goes up about 9% a year, and it has for 50 years. And by having a fund, one could incorporate more people and get more investors. And that was an enormous challenge. To start a property fund when you don't have a fund background, to go into regulated business is very, very difficult. The regulators would say you have to be a fund manager to have your fund regulated, but you couldn't get regulated if you hadn't had experience as a fund manager. So it was always chicken and egg. So it was really, really difficult. And the other thing that I've learned is, one, whenever there's a roadblock, find your way around it. There are always solutions. And if we talk about this glass ceiling, find a way of getting round that glass ceiling. And often the solution may be better than the one that you had thought about before you got the roadblock. So work around roadblocks. And the other thing is collaborate and bring in experts. And when I set up our first property fund, and I have to say we still have the only property funds in central London targeting the private rented sector, I enlisted all the help I could get. I didn't try and do it alone. So have a team effort. Having launched the fund, and it was really difficult, people that didn't understand residential properties and asset class, they didn't understand prime central London, they probably didn't understand the private rented sector. Now it's pretty much all that everyone talks about. But in 2006, when we launched that, people had not got a clue what we were talking about. And we went straight into the credit crunch. But we actually produced probably the best globally performing fund worldwide and returned an IRR of 7.5% a year. Our next fund was better timed. It was called the Recovery Fund. We spotted the recovery in 2009. And then one of my friends, when I was traveling in the Middle East, said to me, why don't you launch a Sharia compliant fund? So we get to Sharia compliance now. And I said, you must be joking. Middle Eastern investors are not going to go into a collective investment vehicle. We all know they're not sharers. And he said to me, mark my words, there will be a lot of institutions out there who will need to and will want to invest in a Sharia-compliant product for their customers. And he's absolutely right. We see the Sharia industry growing, stats say, at 10% a year. It may be getting to 3 trillion in 2018. It's growing all the time. And he gave me this crazy idea, and I had no experience in it at all. But I went about finding out about it. I talked to the people that knew about it. And again, it was very, very difficult. And one of the difficult problems is the fact that there isn't any specific regulation about Sharia compliance. So different scholars will say different things. Different people will have different ways about how you might be able to take your structured finance. And our funds do use structured finance. They use leverage. And we use the commodity murabaha, not probably terribly well thought of, but that's the product that we used and the product that was available, and a product that's straightforward. And my other motto is keep it simple. Whatever you do, keep it simple. So we had to really start from a standing start. It was like pinning jelly to the wall, and a lot of it was due to the fact that there weren't any very specific guidelines. I mean, in fact, we went down the line with one bank, got all the financial paperwork sorted out. It went to our scholars, and the scholars said, no way, we don't like this, and we were back to square one. However, we have succeeded, and we now have the only residential, well, we launched the first residential, Sharia-compliant residential fund in the UK, and we now have the only ones targeting the private rented sector in central London. And now it's what everybody wants to talk about. They also want to talk about it because, I won't go into it unless you want to ask questions about it, massive tax advantages against buying as an individual landlord, and that's a part of a government initiative to professionalise the sector, to make it more available to lots of investors rather than having individual private landlords. But what I want to say is that you have the responsibility to break this ceiling. You all have the responsibility and the capacity to get into the jobs that you want, and you have to think out of the box and take initiatives. And I would say, in my experience, despite the statistics, I've never felt any gender discrimination. I feel genderless. When I go into a meeting, everybody is genderless. Everyone is considered for what they bring, their abilities, their contribution, how hard they work, and that is what matters. And ultimately, that's what every single one of you will be judged on. And if you live by that creed, women or men will get through that glass ceiling. So that's where I stand on the subject.
So to summarise, what's the specific, block that's stopping women from getting into high leadership roles in Islamic finance and retaining those positions?
Yeah, maybe I'll have a start at that. So you talked about what are the general problems that women face and what's specific to Islamic finance itself. I think there are certain systemic problems, and I think both the other speakers referred to problems within the conventional finance and the world at large. And there could be industry-wide as well as cultural factors that are inhibiting. So, for example, the leaking pipeline, as they call it, of women in the industry, about how women at a particular stage in life are not supported enough to make the life choices and so on and so forth. The answer to the question is to, because Islamic finance is a nascent and a smaller industry, is to learn the lessons and use the best practices from what we already know in the other field. In fact, the way the argument has been framed, and I've been hearing this also today, and I think Naomi talked about it, in fact, we have advantages with Islamic finance being rather proactive, driven by both a sort of a meritocracy because it's a successful organization. So on one hand, being ready to acknowledge what are the inherent problems, but also see the opportunities that are over there. Yep.
Yes, I would absolutely agree that in many ways you've got more opportunity than if you went into the financial sector. It's such a young business and it's so small, there are lots and lots of opportunities. So the Islamic fund business worldwide is $500 billion, but the conventional one is $700 trillion. If I set up a fund, you can all set up funds, and you can set up funds investing in ethically valuable projects or social impact projects or whatever. So actually, I think there's more opportunity in the Islamic sector than there is in the conventional sector. And also the other thing about the Islamic sector, if you start getting involved in it, is it's very small. Everywhere I go, I see people I know. Every conference I go, I know the people on the panels. So it is really, really easy to become a big fish in a small pond. So in many ways, I think that there's every opportunity for women to get into the Islamic sector, and probably more opportunity than to get into the conventional sector. So I really think that there isn't that gender bias or issue for women. And women take as many graduate jobs, it's almost 50-50, as men do. And so they have got every opportunity to start on that ladder. So I really think that a new industry needs new blood and new thinking, and it's open for it.
I just want to add, I agree completely with what's been said. I have so many friends that are in banking, so many women friends that are in banking, in the financial industry, whether it be conventional or Islamic. I don't think there's anything stopping women from getting involved except the women themselves. Are they making other choices? I don't really know. I wish I knew the answer to that, and maybe you can ask. Maybe I should ask you why you think that women aren't getting involved in the financial industry or Sharia-compliant financial industry, because I think they are.
I mean, I think that's a question to the audience.
Yeah,
I mean,
throw that
do we
right back.
know that there are less women going into the Sharia financial sector than men? I don't know that. Is that just a kind of idea that's in the ether, or is it actually a reality? There is no gender bias between conventional finance and an institution which is Sharia compliant or Islamic, certainly over in the UK or in the Western world. So actually that kind of, and I wouldn't disagree with you, but it kind of, I think, agrees with me that this subject of contentiousness and women in Islamic finance is not a contentious issue, because actually what you're arguing is that there are equal opportunities in the Sharia world as there are in the conventional world, which is exactly how it should be. And my point is saying that there might be more opportunities in the Sharia world is simply that there are more opportunities to be an entrepreneur, there are more opportunities to innovate, there are more expansion opportunities within the Sharia world because it's a much smaller sector. So in the sense that there can be more growth, and maybe more positive growth, and maybe Islamic finance will take a chunk out of conventional finance because of the ethos and the ethics and all the things that we're talking about, there could be more opportunities going forward. But I think we're therefore all agreed that there isn't a gender difference between whether you're going to Islamic finance or into conventional finance. At least that's what you're saying. Other people may disagree.
Yeah, just taking a rather sort of global comparative approach, it's quite clear that there are different trajectories involved. And certainly Malaysia, that you mentioned, is far ahead of the others. And I thought, Hanan, you brought it out quite well, that even though there might be culturally very different sort of gender dynamics, it's interesting how professionally and institutionally Malaysia is far ahead of all the others. The challenge over there is really replication, scaling up, and learning from each other. But I think there are several conundrums involved over here. The first one happens to be when, I thought it was fascinating, you gave your personal example, but are these opportunities available for women at all levels, for all women and all types? So one of my concerns happens to be that if Islamic finance is about ensuring equal opportunities for those who are already within the system, that's great, that's a low-hanging fruit. But if we are to expand and think of Islamic finance as having one of its objectives, financial inclusions, because over 70% of Muslims worldwide are in fact excluded from any formal banking, then there's a bigger challenge. It's ensuring that women who are right now not elitist, not urban, not educated, not like how most of us are, what are the opportunities for them to break into the system? That might be a little more difficult. But I think that as it stands, if you're talking about kicking the door open for many of us who are near the door, yes, that actually works. How far back people in the queue are able to have a shot, that is something that we all should be working on.
Let me first state that I don't have children, so I've not been put in that situation myself. Obviously, I have female colleagues who have children. I've managed women who, I'll answer this with an anecdote. I had a woman in this Sharia-compliant bank. By the way, a Sharia-compliant bank that I work for gives the basic maternity leave. So in terms of, I mean, this is something that I'm not proud of, and it's something that I'm trying to change within my own bank. Because I just think that if you're going to go back to the Islamic ethos that the gentleman was talking about, we need to lead by example. And if we are going to have encourage women to come into this industry and to succeed in the industry and to be able to stay in the industry, even when they're in the childbearing age, a stage of their lives, we need to do something to do something about that. And the statutory minimum of a maternity leave is not the way to do it. But I had this a woman who was working in my team, and she came to me and she looked really worried and frightened, and I need to speak to you, and she shut the door, and I thought, oh God, you know, what's going on here? And she was visibly distraught. And she was shaking, and she got teary, and she was telling me that she was pregnant. And I looked at her, I said, is that it? And she started crying, and she said, yes, that's it. And I said, well, that's great, congratulations. I mean, why are you crying? Well, I thought you'd be upset. And I just looked at her like, why am I, as your manager, why am I a consideration in the decision for you and your husband to have a child? I mean, why do I even come into the equation? She was worried because she thought it would affect her job. She was worried because she thought, you know, she wouldn't be able to go and come back, the job wouldn't be there. And I just thought, oh my God, you know, is this what women feel? And I can't say that this is something specific to an Islamic bank. You know, it's certainly not something specific to Gatehouse. But I think that within any industry, not just Sharia compliant industry, or not just within finance, I think that you know, if you want women to reach higher levels, not just in management, but if you want them to reach board level, where the stumbling block appears to be is during sort of the child-rearing ages, the age that women reach when they start to have children. Because unfortunately, men are not going to have the children. It has to be the woman that has the child, and so at some stage she does have to leave. Fortunately, we live in a country that yes, there are laws in place. The job has to be there for you when you come back. Can it be improved? Perhaps. You know, I'm not an expert on it. Perhaps it can be improved. Again, that'll come from men and women equally. Can paternity leave be improved? Personally, I think so, yeah. I mean, I think it's 2 weeks now. I don't think that's enough. I know a lot of fathers that want to be involved. I know that companies are taking it upon themselves to say, hey, you know what, if you want to split maternity and paternity, we'll give you, you know, if your wife is taking half of her maternity leave, we'll let you take the other half of that. And so I have a friend who took 6 months off paternity leave and was able to spend 6 months with his you know, his baby, which is invaluable. At the end of the day, my personal belief is that whatever we're doing from 9 to 5 or from 8:30 to 6:30, the grand scheme of things, and I said this to this colleague who came to me frightened to say that she was pregnant. I said to her, none of this matters. None of this. You're coming in and doing what? I said, at the end of the day, what matters is you're going home to your family. You're bringing a child into this world, and that's far more important than anything you're going to do at Gatehouse Bank. And that's my personal opinion.
If I could just add to that, to answer your question, in my experience, women take maternity leave and men take off 2 weeks. So it's always the woman that takes off the long amount of time and the men just take 2 weeks off at the beginning. So there is an inherent bias there. And one could, and indeed legislation is changing to equalize that system, but I don't think men will take off the time anyway. And I think it is an issue, but it's not just an issue that women take off a certain amount of time and then come back. What you do find, of course, is that women suddenly find that they have other priorities in their life and other things become more important. So women will also make lifestyle choices, and they have, or they may have, the fortunate ability to take those lifestyle choices. But the trouble is that if they take those lifestyle choices and they do take time out of the job market moves on, the other people move on, and they lose valuable training time and valuable skills. So that lifestyle choice to take more time off to look after your children will impact on your career. And I find it very difficult to see ways in which that won't happen, or that people want obviously to come back part-time, but so much of what we do is for full-time. People want service at a click the whole time. Everything in our culture is to do with immediacy. I mean, the fact that we now have electronic communications that we have to respond to within minutes, everything is immediate. People want immediate access to people. So these are real issues, and I don't know what the resolution is, but many women actually do decide to take a change in career at that point in time. And I think we have to accept that that's one of the reasons why there will never be as many women represented at top positions, because they have made that particular lifestyle decision.
As a man working, supporting many of the UN projects in the Middle East, can I just make actually a very limited point? That the changes that are taking place right now are really very fast and dramatic. They're not just born by the nature of the industry, but it's to do with urbanization, it's to do with the economic challenges which require women to take a more sort of proactive co-leadership role, sometimes exclusive leadership role. So as much as we are talking about how the industry has been, even as we speak, I think women's choices are actually filtering down to making change in terms of the industry culture itself. So watch the spaces, and we are watching changes which are going to...
It's also interesting, because I did look up the statistics before I came today, that people who live in the rural areas are far more likely, women, to go back to work than they are in urban areas. And that is actually because they will have family structures that will support them, and we don't get that in urban areas. They can probably leave their kids at home and go off to work and not worry about it because there will be neighbours. So unfortunately, our kind of urban revolution and the kind of move from people from the country into urban areas also affects the ability to women to go back to work because they don't have the right structures around them. Of course, if we can move to more off-site working, that might improve things. But unfortunately, even if you can move to off-site working, even if the way people work changes and women lead that, unfortunately, personal contact, communication, being with the people, interacting is so important to business that living in or working in kind of isolated areas where you're at home in kind of capsules doesn't necessarily work. Even if you can get the job done, you don't get the personal interaction. And actually, for all businesses, probably the essence of any successful business is communication.